What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to my channel. It's MadSandar here. Today we gonna see the subreddit r/Prorevenge, the subreddit when we found people give the best revenges ever. Our first story is from 327 Nova. 25 years ago my aunt passed away when I was a baby, leaving my two cousins who were both in their early 20s alone to fend for themselves. My grandparents, who were very wealthy, put a clause in their will that grandkids will receive half of their share of inheritance if a parent passes before the children reach age 30, and then the other half when my grandparents eventually passed. Both my cousins received a very sizable inheritance coupled with the money they got from selling my aunt's house. The younger of the two paid off her college loans and was able to buy property. She still lives on the same plot of land. The older sibling blew all of his money, straight out of a book of the Bible, within 6 years. He was back to living in a condo working as a police officer. Everyone in our small family knew he had a substance issue, so he was barely making ends meet with his officer's salary and buying copious amounts of drugs. The next 4 years my cousin went to rehab 3 times, sponsored by my grandparents. He sobered up after getting his girlfriend, now wife, pregnant. Absolutely wretched woman. She saw my grandparents' payday and essentially baby-trapped my cousin, thinking it was her ticket. Within 7 years they had 3 kids, so she is locked in tight. Shush is a nurse, and with 3 kids around they always needed a little boost. Guess who they would always ask? You got it, my grandparents. Being the kind spirits they are, they always lended a hand. My father, mother, sister and I got sick of it very quickly. My grandmother unfortunately passed away when I was 17, leaving my grandpa as the last remaining. I was undoubtedly my grandfather's favorite among the grandkids, which left a real sore spot in the mouth of my cousin and his wife. I had 2 more years at home before college, so I lived with my grandpa to keep him company and help take care of him. My cousin and his wife hated this so much, so that whenever they came to visit and I was not home, they would send their 3 gremlins into my room to destroy it. My room had double doors so it couldn't be locked. This was the start. The longer I lived there, the more they would mess with me. My cousin even went as far to place one of those little mechanical noisemakers in the cabinet in my room, the ones that play sounds at random intervals that make you think you're insane. Thankfully my German Shepherd would always hear it, and after a week or so she finally found it. They did this to distance me and deter me from taking care of Grandpa so they could swoop in and be the heroes. This continued until one of the kids found my gun. By this time I was 18 and in the possession of a firearm. I use quotations because my grandfather has guns, but cannot aim and shoot them anymore due to arthritis and nerve degeneration, so when I moved in, he placed all the weapons in my hands should the need of self-defense arise. But should he see 'em out for any reason other than cleaning, there would be hell to raise. Being very well trained with guns and having a sense of pride in defending my home, I took this responsibility very seriously. I always kept a handgun in a locked container in my nightstand with the key on a high shelf out of reach from the gremlins. One fateful day, I am out getting my grandfather food when I come home and my older cousin, his wife and my grandfather are staring at a gun on the table. It was my gun that I kept in the lockbox. It was loaded and had a bullet chambered. I always keep a magazine in the lockbox but never loaded into the gun. The lockbox was nowhere to be seen. My cousin claimed one of the children found the gun and was playing with it. I was 100% certain that he either found the key or broke the lockbox open to get to it and load it. As a 6-year-old would not be able to reach a key I could barely grab, figure out what it was to load my gun and chamber it. I tried my best to explain what my cousin had said was bullshit and that I never keep my firearms loaded in the house, but my cousin, who is a cop, scolded me on gun safety and threatened to have me arrested if I didn't leave and hadn't arrested me yet, because we're family. I was asked to collect my belongings and go back to my parents. My cousin had won, or so he thought. The next day I apologized to Grandpa and explained to him there was no way one of the kids could have gotten the key. He agreed with me and he apologized, but he thought it best I move out until things cooled down, but once they do I would be welcome back home. Our relationship was a little fractured due to disinformation provided by my cousin. A month later, my grandfather died of a heart attack at 86. I was devastated. I was just beginning to get back into rhythm with him and rebuilding the trust that was somewhat shattered. To this day, I am still unsure of what kind of man he saw me as due to my cousin. Immediately, my cousin and his wife began sucking up to my dad. As they had sealed payday with Grandpa, it was time to move on to the uncle. This persisted for a month or 2. I wouldn't stand for it. Then came time for the will. My grandfather's lawyer read out the will to me, my father, mother and sister in our home. Our 2 cousins would be briefed individually on their share of the estate, per my grandparents' requests. Then the miracle line in the will comes to fruition. If anyone attempts to claim any part of the estate that is not assigned to them, they forfeit any assets they are supposed to receive and will be divided equally among the remaining family members. This was basically their way of saying, if you try to claim more than you're given, you get nothing. My father is supposed to receive every piece of physical property, aside from 2 or 3 items he set aside for me, from my grandparents, as he is the only remaining child. The revenge. I hatched my plan. I called my cousin and told him all of Grandma's jewelry was to be donated to a charity auction. Grandma's collection of gems and metals was extensive to say the least, so a charity event wouldn't care if a few pieces didn't make it right. It was a lure of gargantuan proportions that my greedy bastard of a cousin could not resist. He bit right on it and headed over to my grandparents' house ASAP, determined to snatch up as much as he could. A handful would send his kids to college. Regardless of what I said, the jewelry was never going to go to him anyways, so his actions were purely his own since none of it was destined to be his. Coincidentally, Dad was on his way with the lawyer to my grandparents' house to overlook everything, formality stuff. According to my dad's testimony, my cousin had 3 shoeboxes worth of Grandma and Grandpa's jewelry piled on the kitchen counter ready for loading into his car. My dad and the lawyer stood in the kitchen wondering why it was all there when my cousin walks in from my grandparents' bedroom with a 4th and final shoebox. The jig was up and he put 2 and 2 together that I set him up. Which was true, but there was no penalty against me for exploiting my cousin's greed so he would fuck himself over. It's worth noting that between the 18 years from my aunt's death and my grandpa's death, their wealth had increased several times over, so my cousin felt cheated, and expected to receive just as much as my sister and I, despite receiving half of his already and blowing it. Throughout this whole ordeal, his younger sister, my other cousin, has not had a problem at all and is still weeping over Grandpa's death like the rest of us. However, just like that, my cousin lost enough money in the course of 30 minutes that made him contemplate his sanity. Over greed. My cousin's bitch of a wife apparently filed for divorce a few weeks later. We haven't heard from him in nearly 6 years as he is all but disgraced now. You can call this a fairy tale ending, and on this particular part of the story it somewhat is. There was a massive lawsuit by an unknown family member involving the IRS and FBI later on, but honestly I would rather have my grandparents. The next story is from MadSandar. Our 40-something neighbor Frank Smith has a brother 3 years older named Fred, with the 2 similar in looks and build. Apparently these boys were not obedient children and got into trouble a lot. Frank, mostly, straightened up by the time he reached 21, but Fred kept at it, with drinking, drugs, multiple DUIs, etc. While the 2 were still living at home with their parents in their early 20s, Frank happened to leave his wallet on the kitchen counter one night after coming home from a night out. The next morning, he discovered his ID wasn't in his wallet. Thinking he must have left it at a bar the night before, he tried locating it but with no luck. Not thinking much about it, he just got a new ID. Fast forward a year or so and Frank gets a phone call. It's his uncle whose son works at the county jail. Fred had been arrested and their cousin happened to see him when he was getting booked, under the name Frank Smith. Turns out Fred had given the police Frank's name * and ID * and was going to jail under Frank's identity. Needless to say, Frank was pissed. He went down to the jail to prove he was Frank and Fred was a liar. Fred was ultimately sentenced to serve time and stayed put. During the time that Fred was in jail, Frank received a letter in the mail from the state BMV. It said that his 2 vehicles, an Audi sedan and a VW Bug, were due for e-checks, emission checks. Frank was confused because he only owned a truck. He went to the BMV and discovered that these 2 vehicles were indeed titled in his name. That's when Frank realized that his brother, who had lost the right to own a vehicle due to excessive DUIs, used his identity to register these cars. The revenge. Frank asked how much it cost to get duplicates of the titles minus $8 each. So he paid $16 and walked away with title documents for the 2 cars. He knew enough of his brother's friends to start calling around in search of the cars. Lo and behold, he located them both, at different locations. Frank is a knowledgeable mechanic and could start these cars without keys, but he knocked on the door of each house where the cars were. He explained to each person that he owned the title to the car, showing them the document, and gave them the opportunity to remove their belongings from the vehicle before he took it. They understood and didn't push back. taking their things out of the car and handing him the keys. Frank proceeded to sell both cars and pocket around $3,000 for all his troubles. The good news is that after his stint in jail, Fred got sober and became someone Frank could actually be friends with. The last story is from Lagomorphlover. I worked at a chain salon in the US for minimum wage, plus tips. We got paid on a sliding scale. The more you added services, the more your hourly pay. Then, for back to school, we started offering $10 haircuts. It's dumb to offer a big discount on back to school because that's when everyone needs a haircut, but whatever. Except, to advertise this sale we had to stand on a rickety step stool and hang a 10-foot long 3-foot wide banner off the roof of our store. The step stool alone made it a dangerous task, but on top of it the sidewalk was uneven. Our manager insisted we do twice a day, open and close, in case someone steals the banner. Because certainly, someone would want to steal a banner with our logo that says $10 haircuts. It was annoying, but I was looking forward to my next paycheck. I had a high service dollar per hour, which should have meant a bigger hourly pay and paycheck. Except it didn't. That's $7 per haircut discount. It was coming out of our final service dollar calculations, and we ended up making significantly less than usual. I'd worked there for years, and this was the smallest back-to-school paycheck I'd ever seen. I went in the next day and was pissed. That morning, a co-worker, who was a total brown nose and gossip, and I were outside setting up the banner. It was my turn to stand on the rickety step stool, and I said I was glad this will be the last time I ever do this. I was fully prepared to make a joke about how I was going to fall and crack my head open, when the petty revenge idea came into my mind and I swiftly executed it. When she asked why, I told her not to tell anyone, but I'd accepted a job at another salon with a set schedule, higher commission and $5 more an hour. I said I'd planned on putting in my 2 weeks, but they needed me to start sooner, so I was going to work the weekend and not come back. This would leave us understaffed for the back-to-school rush. After reiterating she could not tell anyone, especially not our boss, she agreed. I left early that day, and on my next shift my boss pulled me into her office. She said she'd heard a rumor that I was leaving to work at a different salon. I told her I had a much better offer elsewhere, but if she could match that I would love to stay. She had to put a call into our district leader about the raise, but said I could work with a set schedule starting the following week. I was working until 9 p.m. some days and at 9 a.m. the next. The unpredictable schedule made finding childcare a pain in the ass. I was consistently ranked number 2 in sales for our store and the district, so the DL approved the raise and I stayed there another 5 years. Which means I got an additional $39,000 in pay for accidentally telling the salon gossip my secret. I also got 20% commission on $500 to $1,000 a week in product sales. For Prorevenge, I also started printing out my service sales slip from the day before at the beginning of every shift, so that when payroll readjusted the paychecks to include coupons, I could pull up my record and dispute it. According to payroll, there was nothing they could do about it. I stayed another 5 years, raising the issue sporadically, until they brought back the $10 per haircut sale and I quit. A few months after I left, I was made aware that a different employee in another state filed a class action lawsuit, and I got a letter asking if I wanted to be a part of it. I accepted, and the lawyer loved receiving 5 years worth of documentation, emails from corporate and payroll, etc. They had to go back through all of my paychecks and compensate me for the difference. This included adding the free haircuts reward program and discounted haircuts as their whole amount, increasing the service $0.19 an hour here and $0.30 an hour there added up, and despite the fact that the settlement was split with a lot of people, I got $10,000 from that in addition to my adjusted pay, which was around half the settlement amount. That was our video about r/Prorevenge. If you want me to do a subreddit you want, comment it down below and I'll do it in the future. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next one.